All right, I think we are officially recording. So, okay. Um, Adam, I'm super happy that I get to talk to you. I've known you like informally as a dear beloved friend for only a few, no, maybe like 4 or 5 years now.
Mhm.
But um, I've also kind of secretly stalked you by like ordering your books and reading them before you even like gave me any. Yeah, I don't know if you
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Cool.
it's so cool. And I saw like this evolution of your books, but should I call you is like
Adam.
Dr. Dave what you go by? Because just Adam. Well, not just Adam, because Adam is an amazing name. But Adam, okay, so I'll stick with that.
Yeah.
And um I I also just love the fact about you that you're this author and also someone who really lives by the principles that you write about as far as spirituality and so many just so many yogic ideas that people express themselves about but don't necessarily incorporate into their lives. And so I really thought, oh, I want to interview Adam for my first podcast for Susma because I don't know anyone else like you. And I know a lot of people who are in the spirituality, like wellness field, but I don't know anyone else like you. Like you're so rare and you're so special um, because of so many reasons that I would love to hear from you about and let you talk about. But yeah, thank you and welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. That was a beautiful introduction.
Yes, of course, a well deserved one.
Thank you.
So since this is my first podcast interview with someone, I'll just briefly, talk about SUSMA. And so I've been working as a teacher. I don't know if you know this, but like for 10 years. And I'm just seeing like this kind of calling and this need to bring more spirituality, more mindful and awareness practices into the classroom. And there have been like a lot of movements to include it, but I think we could do a better job. And so I would love to like start with some of your background because it's really interesting. And I think that it would benefit a lot of people to like understand like you've, how spirituality came into your life first and how you got to the place where you are now. So yeah, I'd love to just like start off with your like upbringing, your background.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my my dad became spiritual like right around the time that I was born. So he likes to say, "I became spiritual for you, son." He gives me the credit. Of course, I don't take it because I didn't even exist, right? As Adam, and he named me. But he was an atheist, and then he met my mother, fell in love with my mother, and she said, I can't. She was a Christian, and she said, "I can't be with a man that doesn't believe in God, doesn't love God." So he loved her so much that he wanted to please her, and if believing in God was the way to go about it, then he was on board. But he's a little bit unconventional. So rather than just attending church with her, he was led to an Indian holy man who he fell in love with. And he would visit India and take us to India. The holy man was Sai Baba, who passed away in 2011. And he had experiences with Sai Baba that just changed his life. And where once he refused to believe in any higher power, um, he came to really live it and love it and raise us in accordance with those teachings. And the teachings of Sai Baba were very simple. They were steeped in in Hinduism, specifically Vedanta, which is the highest expression of Hinduism. So it pulls out all the ritual and all the dogma and just says that God is one, and the individual that you think you are is actually a manifestation of God. So you are God, and that's expressed by the Hindu mantra, thou art that. So growing up, it was kind of a balance of, going to Catholic school and going to church, and then going to India and going to Sunday school, and kind of living a kind of a double life. And we would have these pictures of Sai Baba like all over the house. And he was, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of him, but he was quite an unorthodox looking individual. He had a huge mass of black hair, and he was Indian. And usually the Eastern Indians from Asia, not Native American, but from, he was from Puttaparthi, which is a small village in southern India. They have straight hair, but his hair he had an afro, and it was like Jimi Hendrix, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and he was wearing a robe, and he would sometimes be depicted sitting on these beautiful thrones, and so we would have these pictures of him around the house, and I didn't really know how to explain it to my friends. I didn't want to go into, when you're a teenager, you kind of want to fit in, and you don't even really have necessarily the verbal skills to articulate something that is really unprecedented. I mean, growing up in the 80s just really wasn't heard of as much as it is now. And so I would say,
Right. And I know it's like,
you know,
sorry, I was just going to say, did you have those kind of friends that would come in and sort of recognize it was totally different and probably very holy, but they would kind of just be like, what does it mean? Like, what is that?
yes. So I would be like, well, that's my dad, just kind of
Yeah.
joking. And they would look at it and they would be like, so I just learned to have fun with it and I would wear a Sai Baba medallion, and, kids on my baseball team would ask, well, who do you have around your neck? And I would say, oh, that's Richard Simmons. He was kind of, it was the same like mass of hair, and I would kind of give a story. Well, I used to be overweight, and Richard Simmons, helped me get fit. So it's funny how the adolescent mind creates these stories in order to, and that seemed to me to be more conventional and easier to understand than going into this rigmarole about this, Eastern holy man. But in my heart, I lived those teachings of Sai Baba because they were beautiful teachings. I mean, he was able to take very esoteric concepts, spiritual concepts, and condense them into short sentences. He was like a walking, and my mother said this. She said, growing up a Christian, it always saddened me that Jesus Christ lived 2,000 years ago, that he wasn't walking the earth now, and that I couldn't meet him and be exposed to him. I was just reading what people said so many centuries ago. And when she met Jesus, Sai Baba, through my father, initially she was a little bit put off. She didn't really know, she had no frame of reference, right? Mm-hmm. But she came to view him as a modern day Jesus Christ, and that he really just existed for the welfare of humanity. He was just on this earth to help people evolve. And just as Christ would give parables, and he had, like, when you think of Jesus Christ, you think of the golden rule, and you think of I and the Father are one, and thy will be done, and love your neighbor. There are these kind of short, concise statements that encapsulate Christ's message. Well, Sai Baba had many of these himself. Like, he had messages like love all, serve all, and help ever, hurt never. And, if you take one step towards me, I take 100 towards you. Beautiful, beautiful messages that the mind of a child can wrap his head around it. He may not practice those messages all the time, but this was kind of woven into the fabric of my existence at an early age. And so we would go to Sunday school, which was kind of like the Eastern equivalent to church. We would go to church for an hour, and then we would go to Sunday school, and which was devoted to Sai Baba and his message and his teachings. And that's where we first were exposed to meditation, right? It would be guided meditation back in the 80s,
Wow.
just sitting in front of a candle and then visualizing the candle going through the entire body and illuminating, as consciousness, illuminating the body and arriving at the crown chakra in the head.
Where was that?
It was in West Hollywood. It was a disciple of Sai Baba. Richard Bach was his name, and he converted his house or dedicated his house to this Sunday school. And so it was like Fairfax and Fountain or something. And, as a kid, you're like, why am I doing this? I want to be outside playing, right? But it plants seeds that grow, right? Before you know it, it's become an oak tree, like this little acorn, right? So, and the purpose of that practice was now go home and meditate during the week. All right. Now that didn't always happen, but that seed was planted. And eventually there's what's given to you, what you're exposed to as a child, and then you may or may not make it your own. Some people will rebel to those teachings. My father himself was raised a Christian, and he rebelled. He said, I don't understand this. I've asked priests questions, and they can't give me satisfactory answers to the theological questions I have. So that's why he kind of abandoned God. And Sai Baba had answered all his questions. Well, not everyone embraces Eastern spirituality or the teachings of Sai Baba or whomever. And so you have that choice when you reach adulthood. Am I going to just follow in my parents' footsteps, or am I going to question this and find out for myself what resonates with me? And so after a time, I just started meditating on my own. It was really only when I was like 20. I think before then, meditation is really the best definition I've ever found for meditation. Mindfulness is tough because you're actually trying to transcend the mind in meditation, right? And so when you think of mindfulness, you think of being in the mind, right? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, mindfulness, to be mindful has an ulterior meaning of, paying attention to something, being aware. But in its purest form, meditation is the practice of no mind, of going beyond the mind, beyond the identification with the separate self. And I think for a lot of children, or at least looking back to my own childhood, what I can remember of it, being in the mind, thinking a lot, is a product of education. It's a product of growing up. It's a product of society. And I didn't really have a problem with thinking too much until I was conditioned to do it for so many years through school.
Wow. Wait, this is so interesting. I can't believe you are bringing this into my mind right now. I've never made that correlation. You're right. Because before that, we're more in our body.
Exactly. We're in our body, and we are very attuned to the environment, right? And the interesting thing is mindfulness practices, as practiced by adults who are so locked in their mind and their thoughts, are designed to put them back in their body, back to where the child lives, right? Wow. Because we've become so disengaged, so distanced from what's normal. We're no longer in our bodies. And so with a child, the practice of meditation child lives a meditative life, right? It's only when the child is taught not to fit into society, to be a success, to pass the exams, to graduate to the next level, that they start, the wheels start spinning out of control, and then they start gravitating or needing practices to slow it down and to sever the identification that has been created with a thinking mind.
That's why I feel like this mission is even so much more pertinent, because when you're in elementary school, you get to have, recess and all those fun playtime breaks. But once you're in high school, it's all taken away. But that's when you need it the most.
Exactly. Exactly. That's when you need it the most. And that is when, if you're going to get it, you have to do it on your own, right? You maybe have physical education in ninth grade, but thereafter, if you don't play high school sports, it's physical activity is no longer woven into the curriculum the way it
Yeah,
is.
it's not required after ninth grade. You don't have to take PE then.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I didn't encounter that until I was in college, because in high school I played sports, right? So I played soccer, I played baseball. That was my PE, right? It was soccer for the first half of the year, and then baseball the second half, and then soccer or baseball in the summer. And so year round, it was an extension of that. But for me in college, when I chose not to go out for sports, I encountered, I think, what a lot of students in 10th grade encounter, where I'm going to be sedentary if I don't on my own. No one's going to make me be active, if I don't do it on my own. And so not only are you less in your body because you're using it less, but you're more in your mind, because if you go to college, it becomes more demanding, right, academically. And so you're using your mind more, you're using your body less. And before you know it, you're completely out of touch with who you are.
Yeah, it's so true.
And you have no idea what to do, how to go about it. How do you just see yourself getting more and more out of whack? And no one's telling you how to fix the problem. You don't know what the dynamic that's at work. And so you become a victim to circumstances as they are.
Right. And then you have all these adult responsibilities coming in, and then even get to release that overwhelm of, this newfound freedom and these new responsibilities, and, everything's on your shoulders, but yet you don't have like this system to like help you hack through. It's just sort of like kind of stays in here and probably goes towards here as well.
Exactly. It's like sink or swim. It's like you're not really taught how to swim. You're just thrown in the ocean.
So then did you kind of find your way back to the principles, or had they never left you to the Sai Baba?
They lay kind of dormant. So initially what I did towards the end of high school, I had a girlfriend, and she actually expressed a lot of interest in Sai Baba and vegetarian. Well, I was a vegetarian, and I would kind of hide this from people because I knew what it was going to lead to, and I didn't want to get into that whole thing, right? But she questioned me. She was very inquisitive, and so this is why I'm a vegetarian, because these are the teachings of this holy man. Well, who's this holy man? And I felt that I couldn't really speak intelligently about Sai Baba, other than kind of blanketing her with some of his slogans that I had absorbed osmotically over the course of years, just kind of passively. I said, this is an opportunity. I was 17, for me to sit down and on my own. We were no longer going to Sunday school. It had closed down, but Sai Baba, there were a lot of books that were published on his teachings, on his discourses that he would give. He didn't really write much, but he would speak. He was a public speaker, and so they would be transcribed. And so I sat down and I read these teachings in high school in order to be able to speak intelligently about what Sai Baba's message really was. And then she and I break up, right? And so I never had that conversation with her, but it was another rung on the ladder of this spiritual evolution that I had had. But Sai Baba's teachings were really geared to the Indian commoner, right? I mean, there were Europeans and there were Americans in the audience, but 95% of the people in the audience were the laborers and commoners of southern India, villagers, right? And so just as Jesus Christ, his parables were filled, he wasn't talking about skyscrapers and jet planes, right? I mean, he was speaking to in the language of the people, which he would, his parables were about sowing grain and fishing and being a shepherd, so on and so forth. People could understand that. Well, Sai Baba's parables were very similar to that. They were uniquely suited to the mind of the audience. So there was a bit of a disconnect that I had with Sai Baba's teachings, in that it was hard for me to, and they were also very strict, right? It was, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't gamble, don't have premarital sex. I mean, it was everything that a 17-year-old high school student living in LA does not want to hear, right?
Yeah.
So it left kind of a hunger in me for something that was a little bit more applicable, and something that wasn't just a moral command, because I had come from that in Christianity, right? You have the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
And all of the 10 Commandments are thou shalt not, right? I mean, it's all do not do this, that, and the other. Don't covet, right? Don't have adultery, so forth, So
You
I
know,
want what?
when I hear about the really strict rules and thou shall nots, I always think that whoever they is, who the people who had written those and thought of them, I feel like they kind of knew that we would miss the mark, maybe like 50%. So they just made it really strict, knowing that we would fall short somewhere.
It's like my friend used to say, shoot for the moon, settle for the stars,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're exactly right. If you, I mean, really, if you obey one of the 10 Commandments, you're probably, it's like, you're good.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, okay, I won't steal.
Yeah, I'm good, right? I'm better than 95% of everyone around me, right?
Yeah.
So when I hit college, I just suddenly the light went off. They neurologists talk about how the brain is not really fully developed until you're in your early 20s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so like the area of the reasoning and abstract thought, in the front of the brain, the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, that's not even really mature until around the age of 20, and sometimes as late as like 25. And so I actually felt this part of my brain activate, and suddenly just going along with the program, playing the sports, earning the grades, doing what my elders wanted me to do was no longer enough. I started questioning why, right? It's one thing when you have to go to high school, right? It's compulsory. It's against the law to just drop out of school, right? You have to at least earn your high school diploma, right? You
Yeah.
have to at least satisfy however many credits. You have to at least be in school until 15 or 16, whatever it is.
Mhm.
I reached that, and I had done it well. And suddenly I said, okay, I did well enough to get into the University of in UCLA. So I did well, but I don't feel, the first day I went to school, I said, I don't belong here. I don't feel like I fit in. It doesn't interest me. I don't really, I don't feel inspired by my instructors. There has to be something else. And you can't tell me that you want me to do it, Mom and Dad, anymore, because now I'm going to ask why. And so I had kind of a crisis. It was like a midlife crisis in the first quarter of my life.
First quarter crisis. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I like that.
First quarter crisis. And so once again, my dad came to the rescue. I had the question with him. I said, Dad, what should I do with my life? Right. And it's kind of a loaded question, because probably as a parent, that whatever I say, I better be very mindful of, because if my child takes my advice literally and then it doesn't work out and he blames me, or it does
Oh
work
yeah.
out, I blame myself. What am I going to say? So he went back to Sai Baba's prediction. Sai Baba was, I mean, he was the highest being that I've ever met. And I didn't have really many one-on-one interactions with him. I mean, he spoke 2 words to me in the entire course of the 5 visits that we went to go see him. But he would perform miracles and he would make psychic predictions. Well, one thing he
Well,
did
yeah.
say,
I was just going to ask you, I would love to hear about one of those miracles or predictions because I'm fascinated.
yeah. So he was. We went in when I was 10 years old to a event in Puttaparthi in which all the Sunday schools from all over the world kind of gathered and put on plays and presentations and performances. And so my brothers and I participated in that. And we put on a play about Hiawatha, who was an Indian chief that united all the tribes who had formerly been at war and brought them together peacefully. And somehow it worked out that I got to play Hiawatha. I got to play the role of the chieftain, right? So I was memorizing all these lines, and I had never acted in my life. And then here I am, like in front of thousands of people, putting on this performance.
Yeah.
Well, afterwards, I had kind of like had my 5 minutes of fame. You know, I had my celebrity status as a Sai Baba follower, and there was an opportunity for a student to speak about the effects of Sai Baba's teachings and influence on his life back home. And I was chosen to give that speech. Now, at the age of 10, I had never written a speech and I wouldn't have known what to say on my own. But my dad came through. He stayed up all night we had a little flat with no electricity. So he lit a candle and he wrote out a speech that was simple enough for a 10-year-old to give it and not fumble over the big words, right? So he wrote a speech in my language, and I got to give the speech. And then afterwards, Sai Baba came to me and he waved his hand and materialized a medallion. This is the medallion that I had subsequently worn and referred to as Richard Simmons. He made this medallion and he put it around my neck and he said, "Good speech." Those were the only 2 words that he ever spoke to me. But that was one of the miracles that he performed.
Wow.
Unfortunately, he would get accused of sleight of hand and of being a magician and a trickster, but I can only speak to my own personal experiences. And this was, to me, like nothing that I had ever experienced. So on one of the trips, to your point of your question of psychic predictions, he would call followers into his private room for interviews. And he called on one occasion my family into an interview. And it was our last day before returning to the States. And he looked at my brothers and I was probably 8 at the time, and my brother Justin was 6, and I think my brother GT was 3. And he said, "Would you like to," my parents, he said, "Would you like to know what your sons are going to be when they grow up? What professions they're going to pursue?" Right? And so any parent, well, I don't know any parent, but a lot of parents would kind of, that would take the work out of their hands, right? Oh, just great.
I would love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is an authority that we can agree who, yes, they were all ears. And so my father was a lawyer. So Sai Baba said, I don't see any lawyers. He said, "I see a doctor, a medical doctor." He said, "I see a scientific engineer." And he said, "I see a businessman all over the world, an MBA all over the world." And so years later, that was playing at the subconscious level. I go to my father and I ask him, what should I do with my life? I'm in college. And I know that unless you're planning on going to graduate school, I knew this back in the 90s, right? Where
Mm.
a college degree, even back then, in, in a practical sense, didn't have much use, right? It was almost like the equivalent of a high school degree. I mean, there was really no job that I could get or want with a college degree that I couldn't really get with a high school degree. In fact, I graduated college and ended up working at a restaurant, something that I had done in high school,
Yeah.
right? So I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't see myself going to graduate school. So why am I in college? What should I do, Dad? Right. And so the only advice he gave me was what not to do. He said, don't be a lawyer. In other words, Sai Baba said he didn't see any lawyers, so I can at least tell you that with certainty. But I'm going to watch my footing here because I don't want to give you advice that you're going to hold
Yeah.
against me down the road. But what he did do was something that seemed unrelated. He gave me a book on the teachings of the sage Ramana Maharshi, who lived in the 19th century. Um, and he said, read this. He didn't tell me why. He didn't tell me that it was in any way related to my question of what should I do, right? So I read the book, and the message seemed to me to be, even then, um, don't worry so much about becoming. Be as you are, because what you are is the joy that you seek in trying to become. And that's what stuck with me. So suddenly the emphasis was off. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And on who am I?
Yeah.
Who is this I that's trying to become this and do that? And that was really the beginning of my spiritual practice as an adult, my personal relationship with it. That's when I began meditating and living it
Okay.
inside.
So, but okay, so yes, so that's when you sort of had your moment of really seeing, although just having the awareness of Sai Baba and your dad who did your dad practice meditation in the home? Like did he have that vibration going on? Maybe you were asleep or
Yeah.
you just kind of knew about it. Okay.
Yeah. So he would, because I had asked him about it, because he didn't like wear it on his sleeve. You didn't see
Right.
him in the middle of the house chanting Om cross-legged, right? So I asked him, I said, Dad, when I got into meditation more, well, did you practice? And he said, yes, I used to. And I said, so what did you do? And he said, well, I would sit in front of a candle, and the meditation was first, uh, I see the light, and then the light is in me, and then I and the light are one.
Hmm.
So it was a practice of concentration and of focus and of one pointedness of the mind. And I said, well, Dad, how long did you do that? I did it for several years, and then I had three sons, and a busy law practice, and life got in the way. But he said, even now, I can, in a moment when I have to make a speech or when I have to do something that requires a lot of presence, he said, I can put myself in that place in a matter of seconds, just with a breath, just by taking a deep
Ah,
breath in and out, I can return to that space. So yeah, he didn't force us to do it, and he didn't, advertise the fact that he was doing it. But whatever's going on in a house that you're raised in, you pick up on the energy, on the
for
feel.
sure.
So that's So when you look at your life and you see the life story and you see how every event kind of primes you and prepares you for what follows, right?
Mm.
Had I not been exposed to Sai Baba, his presence was more powerful than the presence of anyone that I've ever been around. And I'm so fortunate to have been able to visit him and be in his sphere, be in his
Yeah.
aura. Now, his teachings were, as I said, there was something that I was searching for that I wasn't getting with Sai Baba's teachings. But they prepared me for the teachings uh, of other masters of the East that would probably been very incomprehensible to me had I not been prepared for them through the teaching.
Okay, so with Sai Baba, the teachings were very maybe simplified, as you said, for the common people of India,
Yeah,
and and so that wasn't necessarily what was going to help you at your 20 something year old self, but it opened the door.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that.
Exactly. Sai Baba I like to say he cast a wide net, right? He had millions of followers. I mean, by the time of my last trip when I was 20, he was just, and this was in the 90s. He had 25 years still to
Yeah.
be around, right? He was, it was rare to even be within a stone's throw of him because there were so many people, masses of people that were just wanting to be in his presence. Um, so, and in part that was because he had this personal, radiance and magnetism, but also his teachings they were geared to the commoner who, because that's most of us, right? Who are working and have our spouse and have our children and are dealing with day-to-day challenges.
He sounds very Jesus like.
Oh yeah, he was a modern day Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the answer to my mother's prayer of getting to meet and have a personal relationship with Jesus. And he came into her life. But in his message, they talk about Jesus Christ and how you can there are many books, and I've read some of them, that talk about the mystical teachings of Jesus Christ, the Zen teachings of Jesus Christ, the esoteric teachings of Jesus Christ. Because if you look at every parable of his, there are always multiple levels of meaning. You can
Yes.
take the literal level, like he can talk about the servants that are told that their master can come back at any time. So they can never drop their guard. They always have to be cleaning house and tending to their obligations because the master may appear.
Mm.
So that's the literal meaning, but at the figurative meaning, Christ can be interpreted to mean God is all around you all the time. So watch what you're doing. God is watching you through your eyes.
That's
You
right.
are never alone, right? So Sai Baba's teachings were very similar to that because in my adult life, I've gone back and I've read his teachings and I said, wow, all the teachings that I was looking for were there. It's just they were interspersed with don't drink, don't smoke, don't have lustful thoughts, so on and so forth. And some of the masters that I had gravitated to, I mentioned Ramana Maharshi, he didn't spend any time saying what you should or shouldn't do. He just said, realize who you are. Everything will flow from that. Once you stop identifying with the mind, the egoic identity, the belief in separateness will dissolve
Mm.
and you will become what you are. And from that awareness, everything good follows. Someone who's self-realized, which is the term often used for someone who has contacted their true nature, doesn't have to worry about doing good or bad. Just as the average person doesn't have to worry about washing their hands or brushing their teeth right? Maybe when we're children, we need to be told this, but we get to a certain age, we cherish our body and our person and we pamper ourselves. Why? Because I take this to be me, right? Well, this once you awaken to your true identity and realize the oneness that's inherent, you treat everyone. You live the golden rule of Jesus Christ, which is treat everyone as you would be treated. Why? Because everyone is an aspect of you. All is one. It's hard to do that just if someone comes from on high and says, be good to others. The ego says, well, why should I? I should first take care of myself, make as much money as I can, earn as much fame as I can, and then maybe I'll give a little money, donate a little money to charity, as long as it's publicized, right? Or as long as it's tax deductible, whatever I can get in return. But once you realize the oneness, right? That we're all manifestations of the one. It's like the sun reflected in various pots of water. It's the same sun.
It's the same sun.
Treating others as you would want to be treated is effortless because you're giving, it's self-love. Self-love is not for this individual, it's for the universe, which is our true body. Each of us inhabits this universe, though we think, but the universe is really in our consciousness. But,
what's coming to me right now is, I'm trying to like see how we get to this individualism in high schools. I know it's like every student is worried about their future, what they're going to do. Like you were saying, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to sustain like at least a level of life that my parents have provided for me? How can I make them proud and things like this? And so I feel like there's this dissonance with like the ideas and practices of more of the teachings of spirituality, and students don't necessarily see the ways they can profit from that. Probably they're thinking more monetarily just because that's, what is just easier to see than the unseen profits. And maybe they get even a little, I hope not turned off, but I could see that being something that isn't as attractive to work towards, cultivating that unseen profitability. And so, where am I going with this?
No, you brought up a really good point, because the ego, in order to be on board, right, in order to adopt any sort of practice or any discipline, first question is, what's in it for me?
Yes.
And it's completely natural. And if that question is not answered convincingly, no one in his or her right mind is going to adopt a spiritual practice, right? It's like telling a child to eat broccoli because it's good for them. No, it's just not, it's not really convincing. Now, if you can make the broccoli taste good, right? Or if the child can see that the broccoli gives them more energy or helps them maintain a normal body weight, but there has to be some sort of, a return, right, on this investment. You're absolutely right. And, at one level, the ego needs to develop. It's like we need to flower into our personality and then realize that we're not the flower, right? It's like children go to the beach and they do this effortlessly, right? They build these beautiful sand castles. And while they're doing it, right, all their attention is kind of riveted by this project they're creating. And then they have no problem when they build it and then the wave comes and destroys it. And they're happy, no problem, because I'm not the castle, right? The problem is when you identify with the castle and believe that the castle is me, that if life comes and destroys the castle or damages the castle, right, you take it that I'm destroyed. And that's what happens when the personality is identified with. life, eventually, the body's going to break down, the mind's going to break down, the reputation is going to crumble, maybe we'll lose our fortune.
Oh, and that's interesting because that's usually when people find or seek out some sort of practice, is when everything has been taken away.
That's exactly right. So for a child, it's like, well, things are great. I'm in perfect health. I have all this energy. My mind works. I love life. I'm at one with life. I'm not a prisoner of my mind. I'm not really identified with my mind because I don't use my mind except when it's required, right? I use it to solve math problems, and that's what children do. So it's like a lot of these practices are to help us, as Christ said, become as children again, right? It's like being born again, right? Returning to that childhood, that natural flow and oneness with existence. That children, and in that respect, they're our greatest teacher, right? Children are our greatest teacher, and that they teach us who we were, who we still are, although we've forgotten, right? We've been kind of hypnotized by life. And so we can return to that, and that's kind of a spiritual rebirth. And so for a child, I think the greatest service that you can do a child is always remind them, whatever they do, right? Children love to pick up things, and if they're good at it and they get, praised by it, then they're gonna devote more time to it, right? If it's sports, if it's musical instrument, if it's school, whatever it may be. Because the ego is developing around that, right? The individuality, the sense of individuality is developing around that. And so to tell a child, and children are generally happy, right? And the purpose of spiritual practice is to reconnect us with the joy that is our essential nature, right? So to tell a child that practicing meditation will help you connect with the joy that you really are, a child's going to be like, well, I'm happy, right? Like, what do I really need? Adults need it because adults have forgotten that, right? Adults need to be reminded that of the following, that every desire that we have is we have everything we want in order to make us happy, right? That's at the root of everything. I want a beautiful spouse. I want to have children. I want a great job. I want a lot of followers. Whatever it may be, it's all to be happy, right? And the spiritual practice, the essence of it is anything that you can get can and will be taken away with you. Everything that's born dies. Everything that has a beginning has an end, right? So enjoy life, but remember that it's futile to seek happiness in anything that's external to you, because either you won't get it or you will get it and it'll be taken away from you. What is important to recognize is you are the happiness that you seek, right? If you want $1 million and you get the $1 million and you're happy, it's not the $1 million that are giving you joy. It's the $1 million are catalyzing the expression of the joy that you already have naturally, right? In you, right? And so that's the purpose of spiritual practice. And so for a child that is happy and that's joyful, they have the fruits, they're eating the fruits of spiritual practice as undertaken by adults. But what it would help for children is to teach a child that whatever you pursue, whatever talents you develop, great, enjoy. Life is a wonderful game, play it. But don't identify with whatever you are or with whatever you do, right? You want to play sports, you're a great athlete, great, right? There was a time before you were an athlete. What were you before you were an athlete?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Where you could really access true joy without praise.
That's it, right? That is who you really are.
Yeah.
Right? And that was Jesus Christ's message, right? The Pharisees would come and they would interrogate him, the Jewish priests. and they would want to kind of catch him, right? And so they would ask him about the great patriarchs of Judaism. They asked him about Abraham, who lived thousands of years even before Christ. And Christ said, why do you concern yourself with Abraham? Before Abraham was, before he existed, I am, right? Christ was speaking to the eternal nature that exists in each and every one of us, right? We come into this world, it's just pure, perfect awareness. No concepts, no memory, no mind, no role, no talents, no opinions. And then life is like walking along the seashore. We collect all these beautiful seashells. But there's going to come a time where we're going to need to leave the beach and leave those seashells behind. And so the task as an adult who's kind of graduated from the hard knocks of life, experienced praise and then blame, victory and then defeat, is to tell a child, enjoy, but don't identify.
Yeah.
You exist prior to anything, and you will exist after anything that you enjoy. So just enjoy.
Just enjoy.
Enjoy.
Yeah, okay, Dr. Adam Dave, hold on a second, because I can't believe it's like, already been almost an hour. So I want to I have time. Do you have time to answer
Sure.
this question? Please take as much time as you want, because this is like what I really want to know from you.
Yeah.
Is so you've like every time I reach out to you, which is, I don't know, I think about you so often, right? But I only end up reaching out to you, every once in a while. And there's always like a new book that you've written. And then you also you made your way through medical school. You've, been a marathon runner, a barefoot marathon runner. And I just want to know, like, if you were working, if like a school district, or let's just say, the Department of Education of the United States of America came to you and said, hey, Dr. Dave, what is one or two practices that you think we should include in our schools? What would you tell them that we should focus on? And so, because I know that this would be kind of a hard sell, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to figure out a way to create something that's not necessarily easy to implement, but something that is at least accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah, what would you say to that?
That's a great question. It reminded me when I was preparing for our talk, and you had asked about my exposure to meditation and mindfulness as a child. I went back and I thought about that guided meditation in front of the candle that I told you about in Sunday school. But then I remembered when I was a senior in high school, and it was a computer class that I was taking, and the teacher, her name was Miss Kalmar. I had to look that up because I still have my yearbook. And I went, for some reason,
So cute.
she was the one teacher senior year whose name I couldn't remember. And she was arguably the most memorable because of this practice that she had us do before each class. And it was just, she looked like a yoga instructor. She had this real long blonde hair, and she didn't wear any makeup, and she was really peaceful and very soft spoken. And
I bet she was a secret
oh
yogi.
yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
sure. And she would just, before each class, she would lead us through kind of a guided meditation. But it was a meditation that was suited to children, to teenagers who have a hard time sitting still. So rather than have us sit in our seats or lie down or do whatever. I mean, that wouldn't have been very practical, lie down on the floor, but it was a meditation that was really a relaxation exercise. So she had us all stand up at our desks, and she had us focus on our breathing and do some very, very basic postures, elongating our extremities, breathing, focusing on different parts of our body. And all in all, it was about 5 minutes. But I can't, and initially, students were looking at each other and kind of like, like, what is this?
Yeah.
It wasn't part of the curriculum. No one told her to do it. And the beauty of that is that there are no regulations, right? She brought her own unique practice and shared it with us informally, right? And it was always like an hour or two before lunch, right after recess. And I came to really appreciate and look forward to that 5-minute centering practice that she would take us through, that involved the body, right? Because it just reminded us that we were in the body. Simple breathing, simple movements right at the desk that took just a few minutes. And because I think one challenge this a high school student has is they can sometimes be so immersed in their environment, the impression, right, that you're having on other students, your reputation, what you said, what was said to you. The mind is starting to live in its own world a little bit, right? It's starting to, you enter a classroom and it's starting that process of thinking about who you were just talking to in the hall.
Yeah.
Thinking about the test that you have next class. That's when it's starting to happen in the teenage years, where the mind is getting not led astray, but you're taken out of the moment, right? You're no longer
Yes. And there's severe like comparing issues. Like they're constantly comparing their lives to other people's lives.
Yeah. And so what she would do is she would just bring our attention back to our bodies in our breathing. The breathing is, that's a practice that is as old as time, right? The Buddha would talk about breathing. The Buddha would say, he would have his monks just focus on their breathing, right? Do nothing else. He said, if you can do this for 24 hours, for an hour even, enlightenment is yours without your mind leading you astray, right? Because you can't do two things at once, right? If you're going to watch your breath, just naturally, don't have to breathe in a certain way, just be with your breathing. You're with your breathing. You're not with what someone said to you 5 minutes ago. Because the moment you're thinking about that, you're not with your breathing anymore, right? So it's a very, and we all breathe, right? So it's something that we can all relate to. And breathing it's unique in that it's one of the few things that, if you're not aware of it, will go on unconsciously and keep you alive, right? But you can become aware of it, right? And it will still go on, but it's a means to center yourself in the present moment, in the now. And so her practice would just involve watching the breath. That's it, just for a few minutes, watching the breath. And we were pulled back into our bodies and into the now. And when you reestablish that current, then then it was back to the computer and back to typing, back to the task at hand. But the effects of just those few moments of focusing on the breathing and centering the attention in the now were very far reaching. I mean, for hours afterwards, I would feel like just centered.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So so my answer to that question is thanks to Ms. Kalmar to focus on the breath
Yeah.
just for a few moments, counting the breath, being with the breath, being with the sensation of air entering the lungs,
Mm-hmm.
being expired. Because the beauty of that is also you tune into the oneness, right? Because the air in our external environment, what we commonly point to as being out there, like magic with the breath, it's become in here.
Yeah.
So we realize that out and in are really arbitrary distinctions. Air is everywhere, right? We're in
Yes.
transaction with our environment. So that's the one practice that I think that is suited to everyone of all ages, but especially
Mhm.
suited to children, to teenagers, to students, um, because it's something that we all do, albeit unconsciously, all the time. So it's just bringing
Yeah.
conscious
Yeah.
to an unconscious process. Yeah. So a short breathing exercise
Okay, so that's
would be that.
sorry to interrupt you. It's
No,
hard with the Zoom to not talk over.
right.
Okay, can I ask you a second part to that?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I also want to know how did the experts teach it? Like in Sunday school at
Yeah.
Sai Baba Temple,
Yeah.
what was their kind of technique? I mean, was it the rituals that you loved? Was it was it, I mean, I don't even know like a picture of it. I'm trying to imagine it, and the closest thing I can think of is like maybe something like, self-realization temple, what we have here. But even that is catering to adults. So yeah, could you share like maybe your favorite, most memorable ways of the practices um when you were going to Sunday school? Because I'd love to know, like, I feel like you gave me a great example with Ms. Calamar, but then I also want to know, how did it just become kind of, just part of you? Because there's something that like made you so special. Like, what if everyone could be like Adam? You know what I mean? Like, that's where I'm like thinking, not just like you, but finding the God within you, so early on.
Yeah. It's a great question. So it's two parts. First, and there's a progression because there's a meditation can really be divided into two kind of broad categories. There's the preliminary form of meditation that retains the distinction between the one who's meditating and the object that's being meditated on, right? So some practices, like I know transcendental meditation focuses on mantras, repeating, right? Repeating a phrase over and over again. There's the phrase, and then there's the one who's repeating the phrase. And this is the practice that was taught me in Sunday school, and that Sai Baba, on my last trip to India when I was 20, I got into a conversation, just a random conversation with a man I met there from Australia. And he said to me, he said, "Do you want to attain the heights of spirituality?" This guy was an eccentric and he had my attention. I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, Sai Baba has prescribed a meditation that will lead you to enlightenment. And I said, well, tell it to me. And um, he said it's in one of his talks, and he led me to a monthly newsletter that used to come out based upon Sai Baba's talks. But he didn't have it But as fate would have it, my father had subscribed to that newsletter for years in the 70s, and he kept all the editions of them, and they were stacked on his bookshelf in his bedroom. And so the moment the Australian man, who couldn't tell me the finer points of this practice, mentioned it was called the Sanatana Sarati newsletter, I said, my dad has that. And so I come back from India and I like comb through all my dad's editions of the newsletter. And I must have been guided, right, by a higher power, because I found we're talking about, monthly editions over the course of, 10 years, and you're talking about hundreds. I found the talk that Sai Baba had given in which he had detailed the practice of meditation. And it involved sitting in front of a candle, very, very simple, and staring at the candle flame without blinking for 12 seconds and counting 12. Wow. And I would often use just a ticking clock. If you really get into your heartbeat, like I can feel my heartbeat in my chest. And my heartbeat's about, 60 per minute. So you can kind of use that. But for a count of 12, just stare at the candle flame and then blink, right? Once. And do that 12 times. And that's a set. So for 12 seconds, staring at the candle, blinking, and then repeating it 12 times. That's 144 seconds, right? Which is about a little over 2 minutes. Do that 2-minute exercise 12 times. So ultimately the practice it ends up being about 28 minutes where you're sitting in front of a candle and you're focusing. Now, the fact that you're needing to count and you're needing to remember to blink is an aid to concentration, right? It's like focusing on your breathing. I can't count and think about, my problems, right? Yeah. Or think about, tonight's date, or think about what I'm going to have for lunch. I'll lose count. Yeah. And so initially I would lose count. And so then after doing the practice for what I thought was 28 minutes, I would find that it was actually 32 minutes, or it was actually 26 minutes. But as I had gotten better, so I found this in my 20s, and it was around the time where I saw my mind, because I stayed in school. My mother wanted me to get my college degree, and there was really no way out of this, right? And so for a child that had been raised to make his parents happy, I wasn't going to break that habit overnight. So I stayed in school, but the farther I went in school, the more, in my head I became, and the more desirous of finding a practice of meditation I became aware of. So that's why just no one had to tell me to do this. I found this practice and I started implementing it every morning, because I was told that the best time to meditate are between the hours of like 4 and 8, right? So first thing on awakening, right? All your issues that you've kind of sorted out, thought about last night and yesterday and overnight, they've subsided, and you can kind of bring a clear, focused mind to the practice. And so I would do that, and I saw over the course of time how my powers of concentration were improving. So before long, I thought I was practicing for 28 minutes, and it turned out to be 28 minutes, right? So my mind was wandering less and less. And so practices like that, like mantra repetition, like focusing on the breathing, excellent practices to focus the mind, because that is, and you brought it up, we're becoming, I think, as a species in modern times, more and more distracted, because there are more and more stimuli that are vying for our attention, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing this before the internet, right? So there was no Instagram, no Facebook, no news feeds, none of that, no Netflix, right? I mean, we didn't even have cable TV, right? So it was like whatever was on channel 2, 4, 7, 9, 11, or 13, that's what we would watch, right? Wasn't much, no cell phones, right? You called a friend, they weren't home. Okay, well, I guess I got to
Right.
find something to do,
And
right?
we didn't have a phone to distract us on our body
Yeah,
every minute of the day.
every minute, exactly. So, and still I found a need for it. So, and still I had difficulties focusing with 100% accuracy, right?
Right.
So that is the preparatory practice, right? It retains the subject object split, the one meditating and then the object, be it flame or breathing or mantra that's being meditated upon. But it becomes a great practice to focus the mind and to keep distractions at bay. Now, some people choose never to go beyond that, right? They say, and this is, I never went beyond it. I would just every so often come back to this practice, um, probably for 20 years,
Mm.
25 years, right? I think the last time I devoted an extended period of time to this specific practice was around the time you and I met. It was just a few years ago. And I spent the summer, I said, I'm going to do this every morning. It'll be kind of revisiting that practice. Um, and so for 25 years after finding it, I would just come back to it on again, off again. And for a lot of people, that's sufficient, right? Now I'm not as distracted. I'm able to concentrate because you bring that. It's a mental exercise, right? So you bring, it's like learning the keys on a piano. Any
Mhm.
piano that comes your way, you're able to play, right? And once you focus, you learn how to focus your mind. Any task, right, that you're confronted with, you're able to focus on. So in that respect, it's kind of like a musical instrument, or it's like, building model airplanes, because it's something you're focusing on, right? To the
And the
extent
repetition,
in the
the
repetition,
reps. Yeah, the reps,
the
building our
reps.
muscle.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a self-hypnosis almost.
Right.
You're at the end of it, you're almost like at the end of the 28 minutes, you're like, it's almost like you've taken a tranquilizer. You're so calm, your mind is so blank, right? Um, and it's a nice place to be, right? So a lot of people choose, I'm not going to go beyond that. And I didn't go beyond it for many years. The second, um, the graduation of that process is to do away with the subject object split that meditation traditionally relies upon and turn the practice inward.
Mm.
And where once I meditated on the light, now I'm meditating on the one who thinks he's meditating, right? Now, this can be a little bit esoteric for people. Well, who am I, right? What do you mean the one who's meditating? Who's the one?
Yeah.
That's the essence of this form of meditation. It's called self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is remaining with this I, right? This self that I believe myself to be. Who is it that has these thoughts? Who is it that wants these things? Well, it's me. Well, who am I, right?
Yeah.
And so that question itself becomes the practice. It's not an answer, right? It's not a mental exercise. Some take it to be a mental exercise. Who am I? I am God. Who am I? I am God. That's a kind of a Hindu mantra that's used. But then that just becomes like meditating on the light or on the breath, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's self-inquiry is a refocusing of the attention on the source of attention, right? And remaining there. And what you find, did you have a question?
I'll finish. I'll remember it.
Okay. What you find, it's understanding the workings of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And what you realize is, first of all, whatever I can observe, I'm not, right? I learned that from meditation. I can look at the candle flame. Well, that's the candle flame's out there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
But when you focus on this question of who am I, right? You start paying attention to the workings of the mind, the thoughts that you have about yourself, about others, about what you're going to do. You start realizing where once those thoughts were just me, I can take a step back, as it were, and observe those thoughts. Well, if I can observe them, is it really who I am? Or isn't it just like the candle flame or my breathing or a mantra? It's something that I'm not, that I'm watching. Well, who's the one watching these thoughts that I have? Right? Who is this? What is it?
Yeah.
Right? It's not my body. It's not my mind, because the mind's thinking, but there's this I, there's this awareness of the thoughts, right? And so this practice of meditation is an internal practice that involves the realization that what I took to be me and what I took to be internal is not me. It happens in awareness. In that awareness, that's what I am.
Yeah. Yes.
And you get deeper and deeper into that awareness, because you realize, well, what is, you start really trying to understand the awareness. And you say, well, wherever I go, I am. Whenever it is, I am. Whatever is happening, I am. There's very little that I can say about this awareness, right?
Very little. I mean,
Like,
you can feel a lot.
you can feel it.
The
Exactly.
thoughts, yeah, but the saying and the thoughts, it's like they're not much. No.
They're not it. They're an expression of awareness, right? So
Yeah.
you can only know it by being it. And so the practice of self-inquiry turns the focus, the external focus of meditation, onto the workings of the mind
Yeah.
and the belief that we have of who we are, right? And it's a belief that's been ingrained in us, right? That's part of society's conditioning. It happens from
Yes.
the time that we're born, right?
Yeah.
You're
Because
certain,
it's
you're
hard
certain.
to um imagine. I mean, it's almost like a real challenge to admit to yourself that you are loving awareness. Like what? Like that's so big
Yeah.
of a concept. It's almost hard for even myself. I do accept it, and I love that about um us, this, this life, but it's even so vast and hard to comprehend
You're
at
exactly,
times when I really sit with it.
you're absolutely right. Because from the mind, it spells death. The mind, the ego, sustains itself on thoughts, on what it identifies with, right? If you watch the process of the mind, you see that any thought that you have, there are always two thoughts. They're twin thoughts, right? So I can look outside and I can say, oh, it's overcast, right? And that's a thought, right? I hear it as a voice in my head. It's not just one thought. There's the thought that's a commentary about the weather, but there's also the thought, the very subtle thought, that I am having this thought, right? That there's a me thinking it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of, there, two thoughts are involved in any thought. That's the dynamic that's going on. But the thought of me having the thought is just a thought. It's not who I am, right? But it's the ego. It's the I thought, it's called. It's the idea of I, the idea of this me having thoughts. That idea of, here's the dynamic. The idea that I'm having thoughts, that there's a thinker, right, identifies with whatever thought that occurs in the mind, thought about the weather. By identifying with that thought, it strengthens itself, right? It has an identifying feature. It has an object with which it can identify. That identification strengthens the I thought and brings up another thought, right? In this kind of a steady stream. We've all seen this with Freud talked about free association, right? That you can just, and if you watch the workings of the mind, this happens all the time. You can have one thought and it'll give rise to like dozens of thoughts in succession. And sometimes you lose sight of what that first thought was. I caught myself thinking about a high school friend the other day. And I said, how did I think of Pete Karras? I haven't talked to him in years. And because I love doing this, I watch the mind as though it's like a movie screen. I was able to trace back a thought I had about when was the last time I ate pizza, because I was eating something that reminded me of pizza. I think it had tomatoes in it. And then I thought, oh, I used to eat pizza with Pete Karras. And that's how I thought of Pete Karras, right? So you can kind of, there's a stream of thoughts, and then there's always the thought of this me who's thinking the thoughts. But this me is also just a thought. And if you stay with the me, if you think of this I who's having the thoughts, prevent other thoughts from occurring, right?
Okay, so is once you started really doing these practices, is this sort of like when one gets out of their way? And then is that when you started churning out these books? Like, did you just kind of stay with, you know, that I am, and then you were able to just start writing without, you know, I guess thoughts that might necessarily get in the way of like all these downloads? Because your books are so, you know, it sounds like almost you're just getting the downloads from God, the universe, of what to write. It is hard to find like the personality of you in it, although at this point I feel like it's all one, of course. But you know, like, is that, did you see this sort of trajectory of like, okay, that I'm doing these practices, I'm in it, this is me now, I don't even need to sit with the candle anymore, parallel to when you started doing all of your prolific writing?
Yeah, basically, what happened was I left medicine and I realized, okay, I played by the rules. I did what society, my parents wanted me to do. I got the degree, I practiced the profession, and I was unfulfilled, right? It's kind of like I hit rock bottom spiritually, like psychically. I just realized, and I remember saying, I'm lost, like I'm completely lost. And that was the beginning of being found. Because what I realized at that moment was this I who I had invested in, this individual, right, with these accomplishments, with these interests, led me to a place that I didn't want to be. And I disidentified with that I at that point. I said, it led me to question that I, and then to explore it with the practice that we talked about. Like, what is this I? And why is it so hard to just remain as this I? Why am I constantly looking for something to identify with, to identify myself with, to define myself by?
Yeah.
And then I realized that that's just the ego's tendencies, that's the objectifying tendency of the mind. And that's to your point before, like awareness itself, it's so free and it's so limitless that it's almost like there's a book called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It's unbearable. And so it's like we're willing to forget who we are in order to become someone, right? In order to really to forsake forever and infinity and everything in order to become this limited individual person in time, in order to be someone rather than no one or rather than everyone. And it's a self-hypnosis. It's awareness becoming entangled in the personality. And it's a product of society. And there's really nothing essentially wrong with it, right? It's kind of what makes society
Yeah.
go on
Yeah.
and it's fine until it's no longer fine. For some people, it's fine until the day they die.
Yeah.
However, death is the one sure thing. And
Mm.
it's in death that all of us, without an exception, encounter the end of the body, the end of the personality, the end of the possessions that we've accumulated, the end of the roles that we've played in our lives, the end of the identity. And for a lot of people who have been rooted in this individuality, in this identity of themselves as separate individuals, death becomes terrifying because it is associated with the cessation of existence, right? And a lot of people just choose to tune out. Give me pain medication. That's to say, if they don't die suddenly of an accident or a suicide. If it's more of a chronic, debilitating disease, give me pain medication. I want to sleep. I want to bury myself in the sand. I don't want to be present for my own death because I'm terrified of it, right? It's like when we experience too much physical pain, we faint. The body can only take so much, right? If you're exposed to more pain than your body can handle, you will lose consciousness. It's the body's self-preservation mechanism. Well, the same thing happens with the psyche, the mind, right? If I identify with myself as an individual and I'm facing my own death, when I believe that death is the death of me, right? Certainly the death of my body, and I'm identified with my body, I lose consciousness. I'm not present at the moment that I die because it scares the daylights out of me, right? So
Wow. When you
if
said I lose consciousness,
yeah,
that's
I
like kind of a gift to lose consciousness.
it's I to lose ego consciousness is a gift,
Yeah.
right? But to become unconscious in in the sense that you're asleep is not a gift. To become unconscious,
Right,
never.
right, right.
It's avoidance. And but a lot of people, some people can, because I've seen this with my own family members, that even if they're very much identified with their body and their name and their personality and the roles they play, when you have a long debilitating illness and you watch literally the body breaking down and withering away before your very eyes, the safety valve goes off. The self-preservation mechanism is to disidentify with that body. No, this is not me. This body here that you see that's withering away, that's wasting away, that can't tolerate food, that can't go to the bathroom, it's not who I am, right? And it's like it wakes you up, right? Well, spiritual practice is to do that consciously without having to undergo the dying process. It's to die to the false self, right? To question, who is this I? It's the assumption, right, that underlies every thought I have, every action that I take part in is this belief in this I, right? And so the practice of meditation at the highest level is to question this I and to realize that it's just a thought. And that once it's inquired about, the thought itself dissolves and you're left just with awareness, right? The awareness it lives, it doesn't think about life, right? It uses the mind. It's like you go back to a child, right, that's learning its multiplication tables. Why do children learn so quickly? Because they don't have a memory bank that they're drawing from. That's getting in the way, right? They don't have a conditioned self that's getting in the way, that's comparing what they're doing now to what they did before, that's wandering mind. They're completely with the task, absorbing it entirely, right? Well, that's how the mind should be used. It's a great instrument. You and I are using our minds to have this conversation, right? And And this conversation is occurring right now in the present. We are completely here with the conversation, right? That's the proper use of the mind. And with meditation, you return the mind to its proper place. The mind is a wonderful servant, but it's a terrible master. And it becomes the master when we take the mind to be who we are, and we allow the mind, the ego, which only exists in time, in the past and in the future, to pull us constantly into the past and into the future, right? And to sustain its identity in those thoughts about what is not, right? The past does not exist. The future does not exist. They exist only when thought about in the present, right? And when they do exist, when the past did exist, it existed in the present. When the future will exist, it will do so in the present. So ultimately, the present is the only, this is where life happens, right?
Yeah.
And so if we use the mind in the present, that's the proper use of the mind. But when the mind pulls us out of the present, and most of us live out of the present, right? In our thoughts, in our worries, in our anxieties, in our guilts, in our hopes, in our dreams. We spend the present, we waste it on daydreaming about the past and the future. And so meditation pulls us back to the present.
I'm curious about, we're going to go soon, I know, but I just, as you said that, I'm curious about your thoughts then on like the kind of visioning process, like when people, what do they call it? Like future tripping or like vision boarding. Like, I'm curious about your thoughts on that, like whether you have any, or, you know, if you find that it's useful, or if it's really just still us in the present moment, actually. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I recently read the book, The Secret, right, which is based upon that. She even refers to a vision board, and how the premise of the book is thoughts become things. The power of attraction rules life. And so it's whatever you think about, but if you think about it strongly enough and often enough, it's going to become a reality. That the universe exists to fulfill the desires of the individuals who exist in the universe, right? And the universe doesn't know no, right? So if you say, well, I don't want to be fat, the universe doesn't hear don't want to be, it hears fat, right? And so people have difficulties getting what they want if they think about it improperly, right? So a person that wants to lose weight should just focus on being thin, not on not being fat, right? Is an example of it.
Yeah.
But the premise of the book is you can have everything you want. Just think about it. And so live in the future, right? Live for what you want, and then you'll get what you want. But what happens in that, and I've seen it with my own life. I've done a lot of journaling, and I've formulated desires. For an example, I was in Brazil with a friend in my 20s. And in that trip, in the course of my journal writing, I had formulated the desire to live in Brazil and write a novel in Brazil and return to Brazil by the time of Carnival, which I was doing the writing in December and Carnival was February.
Okay.
I had no money, right? And I had no connections in Brazil other than this friend who I really wasn't that close with. But I formulated the desire very, very clearly. And I watched as in the next 2 months, life formulated itself to fulfill that desire in me, right? And I spent the 6 months from February on that year living in Brazil and writing a novel, right? So it's absolutely true that if you focus on your desires and you create vision boards and you dream about the future, you're going to get what you want. But there are two things that I have to say about that. A is if I spend today thinking about tomorrow, and I do that enough, chances are when tomorrow comes, I'm going to spend it thinking about the next day. In other words, you set up a dynamic in which you're never really living. The present is just a time that you use to fantasize about the future and to materialize things. And then when you get them, you may not even enjoy them because you're on to your next vision, right? That's
Right.
first of all, right? Second of all, Russell Brand, the comedian, I read a book of his and he begins it with a really funny little anecdote. And he says, or comment, and he says, isn't it funny how you've heard of the childhood, fairy tales about the genie, right? And someone finds a genie's lamp and they rub the lamp and the genie manifests and the genie offers to grant them three wishes, right? Anything
Yeah.
you want, three things, name them. And Russell Brand said, isn't it funny that most of those parables about the genie granting anything that you want end with the third wish being to take back the other two, right? I got them and I no longer want them because they've become more of a heartache than they're really
Yeah.
worth, right? It's like the saying, watch out what you wish for because you may get it, right? So there's nothing wrong with having dreams and having desires. Um, it's been said that the universe was born from a desire, right? The desire for life to experience itself, right? The Hindu scriptures talk about the thought that gave rise to the universe was, I am one, let me become many, right? Let me have the experience of myself as others, right? That's so the universe really began and is sustained by desire. So there's really ultimately nothing wrong with desire to a certain degree, right? But then you have the likes of a Buddha who came and he had the great revelation that all suffering is rooted in desire. And the way out of suffering is to no longer have desires, right?
Mm.
What happens when I want something, right? Let's say I want a new job. The moment I have that desire, I create a lack, right? Suddenly there's me and then there's something that's outside of me that I don't have. So I've suddenly limited myself and made myself susceptible to that lack that I may or may not get. It's a self-imposed limitation, any desire. And what you also notice with the mind, when you investigate its workings long enough, is that really the mind doesn't want to have things. It just wants to want things, right? That's it, right? And you see that child, right? You give a child what they want, and at Christmas, there's so much excitement around tearing open the gift and exploring these new possessions. And then if you're lucky a month later, sometimes even a week or a day later, they're gathering dust in the corner of the room, right? Or given away, right? And the child is on to
Mhm.
a new desire, right? So when you see, so there's nothing wrong with desires in and of themselves. And there's nothing wrong with having visions for the future in and of itself. But when you realize the dynamic that's at play and that the working of the mind is just to continuously want things, whether or not it gets things uh, isn't really the point. It just wants things. And wanting things pulls you out of the now into the time in the future when you may or may not get those things. You see that dynamic and it becomes a movie that you've seen 100 times and never really enjoyed, or maybe you enjoyed it the first couple of
Right.
times.
Right.
You transcend the mind, you transcend the one that wants these things.
Right.
And that is the ultimate fruit of spirituality, is to teach you that anything that you seek, you already are. You seek it for the joy
Mhm.
that you already are, right? So rather than want things to make you happy, unpeel the layers of the personality, disidentify yourself with the mind, and what you experience radiating from deep within is pure joy. It's pure bliss.
Right. And
He
right.
called it Ananda. It's there and it's independent on whatever happens. It's like if I were a superhero and I had one superpower, it wouldn't be to fly, it wouldn't be well, Superman was always my idol growing up, and he was faster than a speeding locomotive and more powerful than, he could leap
Yeah.
through buildings, all these great, none of that, right? It would be to, I would be called bliss man. It would be to be happy no matter what.
I love that.
Think about that.
Bliss
That is the
man.
ultimate superpower because no matter what happens,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Yeah.
I know who I really am is unaffected, right? Praise, blame, success, failure, hunger, satiation. I'm the witness to all the phenomena that this body and this mind experience and undergo, right? And so that's ultimately the purpose of spiritual practice, is not to seek anything, not to become anything,
Right.
but to cease to identify with the one who seeks, with the one who wants to become things, with the one who believes himself or herself to not be happy. Because that
Yes.
one is a figment of the imagination, right?
Totally. And I feel like that's the real secret. Like
That's
you said, the real secret is to envision yourself in the bliss. Like
that's exactly.
that's the ultimate goal.
You just said it perfectly. In fact, Rhonda Byrne, who wrote The Secret, she wrote that in the like early 2000s. She's written several books since, but her most recent book it's called The Greatest Secret. And it is that you already are what you seek, right? So she's come around.
Wow.
But like you were saying, the ego needs to know that there's something in it for me, right? And so which she gained massive acclaim because she told the ego exactly what it wanted to hear. Anything you want, millions of dollars, it's yours. It's yours for the taking. Just put that, there's more than enough to go around. The ego loved that. And now that she's had all these followers, and the ego's been sold and maybe even seen the truth of that secret, they've been prepared for the greater secret of all that stuff that you wanted, you don't need, because
Right.
you already are the happiness that you believe those things to give you. And maybe those things are more of a headache than you really, it's that line. I always go
Right.
back to that line from the Fight Club, like what you own owns you, right?
Yeah.
What you have to take care of, right? And so rarely when we want something, do we think about all the strings attached to the fulfillment of that desire, all the obligations that are rooted in that. We only see the good, right? We only see like the glory of driving the fast, expensive sports car, not what it costs to maintain, not, whether or not it's going to break down, not whether or not it's going to be stolen or defaced, so on and so forth. We only see the good. And so if you watching the workings of the mind and being a student of life, right? That's true mindfulness, when you are able to observe everything, right? The barriers between what goes on in my mind and in the external world are broken down.
Mm.
And you just remain centered as the witness of everything. You're at the center of everything, watching it without judgment, without critique, without attraction or repulsion. You just watch. And when you watch, when you take off the lens of preference, right? Because we all view the world through the lens of personal preference. We don't see reality as it is. We see what we want it to be or what we fear that it may be, right? They've done studies of this. It's called confirmation bias, that it's almost like useless for a person to read a self-help book because they don't get anything from it. They only get what they already believe, right?
Yeah.
Any concept that is new to the person or that doesn't tally with their belief system, they disregard. They don't even consider it. And so the takeaway, message from a book is what you already believe. It's
Yeah.
just been confirmed, right?
Yeah.
So when
The
you
ego loves that.
the ego loves it. And so when you, because now it has a book to support what it believes. Now they're not just my beliefs, but they're
Yeah.
these authors' beliefs. So when you dispense with personal preferences, you don't want anything, right? We only want things or fear things because our happiness is dependent upon reality going a certain way, right? Fulfilling our wishes, right? When you don't want anything, you don't have a preference, right? Uh, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was a great thinker of the 20th century, he said the difference between, the average person and me is I don't mind what happens, right? Anything that happens is okay because I'm already okay. Whatever happens doesn't change the witness of whatever happens, right? It's like you go and watch a movie. You can be entertained by the movie. You can even be scared out of your wits, but
Yeah.
it's not happening to you, right? You're watching it. And at the end of that movie, you're going to get up and you're going to go about your business. Well, life is a movie that we just so happen to also be playing a part in. It's a very immersive experience. But when you remember that your essential nature is awareness, is the witness of that experience, then, and at your core, you're unchanged by whatever happens, and you don't need anything. You already are whatever you need. Then all preferences, you just drop and you see life as it is rather than as you would have it to be, right? And here you are in the present.
I think that's a great point to end on, Mr. Blissman.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I can already tell I have to like talk to you more, another like part 2, part 3, part 4.
For sure. It's been
Oh,
great.
Adam,
It's been
thank
wonderful.
you so much. I just adore you. And
I
I know
adore
all
you.
your books are on Amazon. Is there any other place people would find out about you?
That's it, really. I used to have a website, and when I was into, I wrote a book on nutrition, and I just, I don't know. I decided that I didn't need it. So I write these books because, like you were saying, they're kind of maps that, I write as I explore the inner terrain.
Yeah.
Um, and, the map is not the thing. You can't look at a map and say, you can't look at a map of South America and say, now I know South America, right? You can say, well, maybe I can use this map if I want to go visit South America. But this is what these books really are. They're just maps, or little, what I like to think of as, kind of guideposts along the way and products of my own experience and a little opportunity to be somewhat creative. So yeah, I don't really, market them or in any way or have a website or Instagram or any of that stuff, but they're on Amazon.
Yeah, they are. And one of the things I wrote down is monthly mindful newsletter, and I'm totally gonna be using some of your quotes from your books in my monthly. It's like genius. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like perfect. Have a monthly mindful newsletter. Like
I think that's
easy
great.
peasy. Yeah. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much for
Yeah.
that. Everything, everything. I love
Thank you.
you.
I love you too. It was so great spending this time with you. Let's
You
do it again for sure.
too. Yeah, please. I'm gonna go ahead and say goodbye, but hang on for us to say a personal goodbye.
For sure. Okay.